Off-leg 21B was nestled in the stark landscape of Szubin, Poland. It was more than just a prison camp. For the Allied airmen interred there, it became a crucible. The initial shock of captivity, compounded by the bleak Polish winter, quickly gave way to a profound psychological toll. This was known as kriegaitis. Days bled into weeks, marked by an omnipresent chill that seeped into bones. A gnawing hunger blurred the edges of reality. Basic comforts were luxuries of a forgotten world. With little soap or hot water, men existed in a state of perpetual grime. This condition was exacerbated by the camp's rudimentary sanitation. Yet, amidst the gloom and the pervasive on-the-nose atmosphere, an irrepressible desire for freedom simmered. It was a yearning for adventure that transcended the barbed wire. The possibility of evasion, once a desperate fantasy, was dramatically proven, real just before Christmas, 1942. Sergeant Philip Waring's audacious escape sent a jolt of inspiration through the camp. He stowed away on a coal ship bound for Sweden. His success was a beacon. It affirmed that the impossible could indeed be achieved. It fueled the ambitions of men like William "Bill" Ashe. Ashe was a wiry Texan whose spirit chafed against the confines of captivity. He was a compulsive escaper. Ashe felt a visceral need to break free. This sentiment was shared by many who arrived. Flight Lieutenant Eric Williams and his best friend Michael Kodner soon joined the burgeoning escape efforts. Among the most resourceful was Eddie Asselin. He was a Canadian prisoner of war. Asselin's previous tunnel breakout from O-Flag 6B at Warburg had already marked him as a master of evasion. At Szubin, Asselin conceived a scheme as brilliant as it was repulsive. It was a tunnel originating from the communal latrine, the abort. The revolting, thick stink of human waste was not a deterrent. Instead, it was a perfect camouflage. It was a foul barrier that kept German guards at bay. Bill Ashe, a key digger, recalled the chilling descent into the sump. The revolting stink assaulted his senses. It was a visceral reminder of the grotesque environment. Paradoxically, it offered a path to freedom. The sheer audacity of starting a tunnel from such a place spoke volumes of the prisoner's desperation and ingenuity. Such large-scale undertakings demanded meticulous organization. The nascent X organization began to coalesce. It was overseen by the senior British officer, Wing Commander Harry Wingsday. This clandestine network comprised various departments. These departments were dedicated to everything from forged documents to escape routes. It became the lifeblood of the operation. A crucial part of their success hinged on the daring complicity of local Poles. Joseph Brix, a Czech Royal Air Force prisoner of war, known as Joe Rix, or the Cheeky Czech, cultivated a perilous relationship with Stefania Maludzinska. She was a Polish teenager working in a local produce store. Risking execution, Stefania smuggled forms, secured a camera, and even film. Alphonse Jakowski, a former teacher forced into road labor, then processed the film. Henryk Salczynski, another Polish teenager working in a German bakery, developed the mugshots. These were essential for forged documents. This intricate network of resistance was a testament to inter-Allied cooperation and civilian bravery. It laid the groundwork for a mass breakout. The Germans, however, were not static. Waring's earlier success had already prompted Hauptmann Sims, head of camp security, to implement stricter measures. This forced escapists to develop ever more elaborate and hidden methods. Then came a critical turning point. News arrived of the impending transfer of British and American airmen to Stalag Luft III, Sagan. This impending move created immense time pressure for the Asselin escape. The X organization, led by Jimmy Buckley, known as Big X, and supported by Wingsday, finalized their plans. They met at an executive meeting on March 3rd. 33 men were set to break out on March 5th. Day, ever the pragmatist, declared his intention to join. He reasoned, "As I'm going to be thrown in the cooler for presiding over the escape anyway, I might as well, at least, give them a run for their money." The spirit among the men was one of grim determination. It was punctuated by dark humor. Fellow prisoners, knowing the tunnelers were digging for victory, endured their stinky ones. Some bunkmates jokingly declared they would have a party once the escapers were gone. The transfer indeed took place. By the end of March, The majority of Royal Air Force and US-sedated Army Air Force's prisoners were moved to Saigon. This left WWII to undergo a significant transition. Renamed OFLAG 64, the camp became exclusively for American Army officers. They began arriving in June 1943. The pioneering efforts at Shubin, particularly the Aselin Tunnel, established a foundational blueprint for large-scale, organized escapes. These early, audacious endeavors often involved dangerous civilian networks and sophisticated planning. They subtly challenged the myth that later, more famous breakouts like the Great Escape were the sole or original pinnacle of prisoner-of-war ingenuity. Even if most of the 33 escapers from the March 5th attempt were recaptured within a week, the smell of freedom was an immediate, powerful triumph. The ingenuity and resilience displayed by these prisoners provided a crucial psychological boost. It instilled hope and a sense of agency in the face of captivity. It forever changed the game of cat and mouse between captors and Kriegis. OFLAG 64 was not merely a holding pen. It was a testament to American resilience. It was a crucible where captivity forged a distinct and defiant spirit. Under the leadership of senior American officer Colonel Drake, Executive Officer Lieutenant Colonel John Knight Waters, and S2 Lieutenant Colonel James Alger, the American prisoners quickly established a formidable internal administration. This was not just about survival, it was about maintaining agency, purpose, and a fierce, organized resistance against their captors. Through their clandestine radio, The Bird, and the surprisingly approved newsletter, the OFLAG 64 item, they clawed back a sense of connection to the world. They turned German permission into a tool for their own morale and vital intelligence. Unlike the more nationalized, large-scale British operations, American escape efforts at OFLAG 64 often took on a private enterprise character. Small groups, sometimes even individuals, relentlessly pursued freedom. Each scheme was a testament to personal ingenuity and daring. Whether it was the meticulous planning required to breach the camp's triple wire, the audacious discovery of digging tunnels beneath barrack stoves, or the absurd yet meticulously observed gate escape plans, each attempt underscored an unyielding refusal to accept their fate. Was it successful or not? The risks were immense. This was evidenced by the severe punishment meted out to a Polish electrician, Dariusz Musiel. It followed a failed wire-cutting attempt by Lieutenant Colonel Jack Van Vliet's team. This was a stark reminder that every bid for freedom carried a brutal price. Prisoners learned to chip through concrete. They expertly dispersed tons of soil beneath the very noses of their guards. They transformed the mundane into tools of liberation. This relentless American spirit was met with an equally relentless German counteroffensive. Hauptmann G. Zimmermann, the camp security officer, embodied this escalating threat. He was known chillingly as the Ferret or the Weasel. His petty loathing fueled aggressive searches. These included drilling 10-foot holes and even using explosives to detect tunnels. The barracks shook, and so did the nerves of the men within. The shadow of the Gestapo, with their signature long black leather coats, fell heavily upon OFLAG 64. It led to terrifying, camp-wide searches. They turned rooms upside down. They imposed collective punishments that aimed to break their will. Yet, even in the face of such intimidation, defiance flickered. Editor Frank Diggs, during a Gestapo raid on his item office, famously smoked a cigarette. He ground it out with his heel only after being ordered. It was a small but potent act of contempt. Then came the news that fundamentally altered the calculus of escape. It was the grim truth of the Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3. The Gestapo had executed 50 recaptured Allied airmen there. This was not merely a warning, it was a brutal, explicit declaration that escape was no longer AVE. The German authorities, hardened by Allied bombing and their own mounting desperation, issued most strict orders to shoot on sight all suspected persons. The message was clear, the stakes had become lethally high. In response, senior American officer Colonel Drake, recognizing the suicidal nature of further attempts, issued a devastating order. All organized escape schemes were to cease. This ban, while infuriating to men like Boomer Holder and Andy Johnson, underscored the profound shift in the war's grim reality. It transformed the pursuit of freedom from a daring gamble into a desperate, often futile act of defiance. OFLAG 64 therefore, became more than just a prison. It was a living testament to the human spirit's unyielding drive for freedom. Through meticulous organization, ingenious schemes, and acts of quiet defiance, the American prisoners of war challenged the very notion of passive captivity. They forged a unique brand of resistance that endured even in the face of unimaginable threats. The forced march from Oflag 64 began in the bitter grip of the Polish winter. It quickly devolved from an orderly evacuation into a desperate scramble for survival. It transformed the very act of captivity into a fluid, chaotic battlefield. The initial formation on the frozen Appell ground had given way to a strung-out column. It was a mile long of over 1,400 American prisoners and their guards, all crunched through snow and ice. The cobbled roads, treacherous with 4 inches of frozen slush, became a theatre of human endurance and German collapse. The German guards themselves were a motley crew of teenagers and men in their 70s. Their faces were etched with fear of the approaching Red Army. They were often as exhausted and ill-equipped as their prisoners. Many carried bulging packs, their meagre worldly possessions slung over weary shoulders. This shared misery, combined with the desperate rush of tens of thousands of German civilian refugees clogging the same roads, created an atmosphere ripe for exploitation. As one American prisoner of war, John Dimling, observed a guard casually discard his helmet. The gesture was a potent symbol. Dimling was already weakened by the cessation of Red Cross rations. German order was crumbling. The goon towers of Oflag 64, once menacing sentinels, now stood empty. Their machine guns had been removed. Authority, if not entirely gone, was undeniably lax. For some, the opportunity came even before the main column departed. Lieutenants Bill Corey, Bill Fabian, Hervey Robinson, and Spud Murphy slipped into a pre-existing escape tunnel beneath the kitchen in Barrack Block 3A. They did so with Colonel Good's quiet knowledge. It was an insurance policy against the unknown. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Riggs, captured defending St. Vith, displayed ingenious nerve. He hid in a gap above a walk-in ice chest in the mess hall. He evaded both guards and a search dog. Clarence Maltesan simply feigned illness to return to the camp hospital. It was a quick, opportunistic evasion that highlighted the immediate breakdown of German control. But for the vast majority, freedom demanded a grueling, treacherous journey. The march itself was a trial of physical and psychological limits. It was cold enough to bring a brass monkey inside. One prisoner recalled, the icy wind cut like glass. Cookie tin canteens, filled with precious water, froze, solid, and split. They were rendered useless. Exhaustion became a constant companion. It fostered the POW malaise of acceptance in some. Others succumbed to the vacant Aleutian stare. Their eyes were glazed over from the cold and deprivation. Homemade sleds, crafted in haste, proved too heavy or fragile. They collapsed under their loads. This prompted colourful curses from men whose footing gave way on the slick ice. As the column pressed on, reaching Exin and then the sprawling Rosen estate near Wegheim after dark, the chaos deepened. So did the opportunities. The estate, with its dilapidated manor house and vast farm buildings, offered tempting haylofts and cellars. This was where the initial trickle of escapes, like a small hole in a levee, quickly became a rushing torrent. 30 Kriegies would escape the column at the Rosen estate that night alone. Boomer Holder and George Durgin simply abandoned their useless sled. Their canteens were frozen and split. They melted into the darkness. Major John Jack Dobson, a commander of the 1st Ranger Battalion, turned to Office of Strategic Services operative Jerry Sage. "I'm bugging out, Jerry. Want to go with me?" Sage, initially too cold and paralyzed to move, replied, "Go ahead. I'll have to make my move when my legs start working." But the lure of freedom was too strong. Sage soon found his legs. He hid in a cellar filled with rutabagas. There he tasted his first day as a free man. After nearly 2 years, Bingham and Kroll were among the first Americans to successfully escape the Oflag 64 column on the march. They were pulled into an alleyway by a compassionate Pole. They were led, like a bloodhound with a scent, to safety among cows. There, the Polish underground, risking their own lives, provided them with warm, sweet milk and black bread spread with pig fat. Major Robert Bob Crandall led another group. They burrowed deep into a haystack. Their hiding place was nearly discovered when a corporal of the guard, alert to men in the haylofts, fired his Schmeisser into the hay. He narrowly missed the concealed prisoners of war before a German captain intervened. The corporal, enraged, still shoved the recaptured men against a wall. He threatened them. The big break was not a single, coordinated event. It was a multitude of individual acts of daring. Each was a testament to stubbornness, pluck, and grit. It was a common, irrepressible desire to be free. Over 250 prisoners of war, specifically 241 American officers and enlisted men, successfully evaded capture from the marching column. It was an escape that left the Great Escape well in the shade. Frank Diggs and Nelson Tacey, for instance, executed an elaborate escape. They disguised themselves as a German soldier and a Polish worker to breach a barbed wire fence. They were sheltered by the WWII family, Polish civilians. While offering soup, the family also expressed profound concerns about the looming threat of communism. It was a stark reminder of the complex political landscape in post-war Poland. Alfred C. Nelson, along with Nicholas Munson, slipped into the forest. Nelson's subsequent solo trek led to a perilous encounter. He was tied up and nearly faced a firing squad by suspicious Russians before managing to evade them. Even Stefania Maludzinska, a Polish woman who had risked her life aiding previous escapees from Oflag 21B, emerged from hiding after the Germans left, but she was heading away from the Red Army. She feared the Soviets more than she cheered the departure of the Germans. This mass breakout, unprecedented in American prisoner of war history, underscored not only the unwavering determination of the prisoners, but also the profound breakdown of German authority on the Eastern Front. The Germans, anxious about the approaching Russians, conducted less thorough searches. Their capacity for control vanished like a small hole in a levee that quickly became a rushing torrent. The Big Break was a powerful human narrative of agency and defiance. It was a living refutation of any notion that prisoners of war were passive victims. It was a vivid illustration of a disintegrating Reich unable to hold its captives. The Red Army's thunderous advance across the Eastern Front, a tide of steel and men, heralded a new, bewildering chapter for thousands of American prisoners of war. The initial encounters, the meeting the Ruskies, were a volatile mix of profound relief and unsettling trepidation. For men who had known nothing but German captivity, the sight of American-made tanks and trucks should have been pure liberation. These were driven by Soviet soldiers, and in moments like the spontaneous, heartfelt rendition of God Bless America by the newly freed prisoners at Oflag 64, that hope burned bright. John Dimling among them remembered, and how we meant it, yet this benevolent image of liberation quickly fractured under the harsh realities that followed. The promises of freedom dissolved into a morally ambiguous landscape. Instead of a straightforward path home, many American prisoners of war found themselves thrust into a new, chaotic struggle for survival. Widespread looting, drunkenness, and arbitrary violence by Red Army soldiers became a grim daily reality. It challenged any simplistic narrative of a benevolent liberation. For some, the new allies quickly proved as dangerous, if not more so than the former enemy. This unsettling truth prompted desperate measures. For Lieutenants Bill Corey, Spud Murphy, and Peter Geisch, their journey for freedom did not end with the Red Army's arrival. It merely shifted. Having already escaped German hands, they found themselves in the Soviet-controlled camp at Rambato. It was a supposed sanctuary that quickly became a new prison. Conditions there, they discovered, were shockingly worse than any German prisoner of war camp. There was no running water. There was no heat in the bitter February cold. There was only a meager ration of barley for food. 1,500 civilians, alongside bewildered prisoners of war, were crammed into a single building. It was under the watchful, hostile eyes of NKVD guards. Mistaken for German infiltrators, Corey, Murphy, and Geisch were jailed. It was a chilling reminder that their nationality offered no inherent protection. This was not the liberation they had envisioned. It was a continuation of captivity, under a different, more unpredictable banner. It forced them to attempt yet another escape. This time, it was from their supposed allies. Meanwhile, the first credible intelligence from the Eastern Front reached Western Allied Command. The Moscow trio lieutenants, Ernest Gruenberg, Frank Colley, and John Dimling arrived at the United States Embassy in Moscow. They had successfully navigated the treacherous journey from German-controlled Poland to the Soviet capital. Looking and smelling like hobos, they were quickly debriefed by General Dean, chief of the American military mission. Their critical testimony provided Washington and General Patton with the first concrete details on the location and status of key American prisoners of war still in German hands. This included the senior American officer Colonel Paul Goode and, crucially, Colonel J.K. Waters. The news of Waters' captivity at Oflag 13B in Hammelburg struck a deeply personal chord with General George S. Patton. Waters was not just another officer. He was Patton's son-in-law. This personal connection, a powerful and often unacknowledged force in military affairs, directly triggered one of the most controversial and high-risk rescue missions of the war. Despite initial resistance from senior commanders who deemed the 60-mile drive behind enemy lines too perilous, Patton's personal interest became the driving force behind the creation of Task Force BOMB. As these dramatic events unfolded, United States military intelligence moved to control the narrative. A blanket ban was swiftly imposed. It prohibited returning prisoners of war from speaking publicly about their experiences. The reasons were manifold. It aimed to manage morale on the home front. It aimed to avoid compromising future war crimes trials. And, perhaps most significantly, it aimed to prevent alienating the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was an essential, if increasingly strained, ally. This ban effectively suppressed first-hand accounts of the chaotic and often brutal realities of Soviet liberation. It shaped the public's understanding of the war's end. The commander chosen for the audacious Task Force BOMB was Captain Abraham Baum. He was a young officer just 3 days shy of his 24th birthday. His appointment came unexpectedly. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Cohen, initially nominated by Patton, was disqualified following a medical examination. It revealed a severe case of hemorrhoids. Patton, with characteristic bluntness, declared Cohen had some sorry ass. The command fell to Baum. This unforeseen turn of events set the stage for a perilous mission. It was born from a general's personal urgency. It launched into the heart of enemy territory. This period laid bare the complex and often brutal realities of the Eastern Front's liberation. It challenged simplistic narratives of good versus evil. It exposed underlying tensions between Allied powers. It highlighted the profound influence of personal motivations on strategic military decisions. The clock ticked past 9 o'clock post-meridian on March 26, 1945. Task Force BOMB, a fleeting armored spearhead, plunged into the German night. Their objective was the liberation of American prisoners of war, including General Patton's son-in-law, at Oflag 13B Hammelburg. But the element of surprise, essential for such a daring 60-mile thrust behind enemy lines, was already dissolving. A costly, drawn-out battle in the heavily defended village of Schweinheim had bled precious hours. It had alerted German forces. The path ahead was no longer a stealth mission. It was a desperate gamble. The journey quickly devolved into a gauntlet of ambushes and fierce resistance. German forces seemed to emerge from every shadow. They were a desperate mix of battle-hardened veterans, young SS cadets, and elderly Volkssturm armed with Panzerfausts. The destruction of the Saal Bridge at Gemünden forced a lengthy, agonizing detour. It swallowed Lieutenant Elmer Sutton and another GI in a plume of smoke and shattered stone. Worse, a captured American map definitively revealed Task Force BOMB's objective to the Germans. It stripped away any remaining illusion of secrecy. As BOMB's column pressed on, the enemy seemed to stiffen with every mile. The air crackled with the constant threat of attack. Bill Nutto, leading a probe column, radioed back a brief moment of relief. "We're in Hollerich, and we found the highway." But the words barely left the airways before his column was sucked into a classic ambush. In the narrow, confining stone streets of Hollich, Hauptmann Gehrig's 50 cadets, hidden in the houses, unleashed Panzerfausts at close range. Lead Shermans erupted in flames. The prisoners of war, who had been riding on the tanks with a fleeting sense of hope, were flung into the air like rag dolls. The chaos of small arms fire and burning vehicles marked a critical turning point. The mission had irrevocably shifted from liberation to desperate survival. Nutto, captured amidst the pandemonium, found himself facing a bizarre, dazed question from a German officer. "Are you a Negro?" The pressure mounted. The situation smelled bad to Baum. The constant threat was enough to make one jeep driver simply burst into tears under small arms fire. Many of the prisoners of war, some suffering from wounded legs and delirium, yearned for freedom. But the cost was becoming unbearable by 6 o'clock post-meridian. With time and resources dwindling, Baum made the difficult decision to assault Oflug 13B. Tanks rolled down the slope, firing. Infantry squads followed close behind. M3 light tanks breached the camp's fences. The wire sang as it snapped. For the prisoners inside, the initial sight of American tanks was pure, unadulterated jubilation. They swarmed the tanks like excited children on playground equipment. A wave of euphoria washed over years of brutal captivity. The game-on mentality, the thrill of impending freedom, was palpable, but the scene quickly devolved into desperate combat and a stark, overwhelming reality. General von Goeckel, the German commandant, was already in negotiations with senior American officer Colonel Good. He was concerned about prisoners becoming casualties. Then, in a tragic turn, Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Waters, Patton's son-in-law and a primary target of the rescue, ventured out to negotiate a ceasefire. He called out, "Amerikaner," to a German soldier. The soldier then shot him, leaving him severely wounded. Waters internally cursed. "You son of a bitch. You've ruined my fishing." The joy of liberation was short-lived. The task force discovered 1,500 prisoners of war. This was 5 times the expected number of 300. The available transport, already diminished by heavy losses, was woefully inadequate. Colonel Good was confronted by Goeckel. Goeckel pragmatically declared, "I am now your prisoner. It is your responsibility." The sight of the disheveled and undisciplined, a rabble not U.S. Army officers, confirmed the impossibility of a full evacuation. Captain Donald Stewart, disgusted by the chaos, decided to escape independently. Lieutenant Robert Thompson also escaped, despite a high fever and malaria. Faced with this impossible calculus, Baum made the agonizing decision to withdraw with only a fraction of the prisoners of war. This led to a tense clash with Major Stiller, Patton's observer. Stiller was primarily concerned with Waters. "I'm still running this show," Baum asserted. His authority was strained to its breaking point. The retreat was a brutal, 60-mile fighting withdrawal back to the River Main. It was a desperate run through a landscape now fully aware and hostile. Hauptmann Kamelel's trainee signalers attacked the column's rear. The last M3 light tank was hit by a Panzerfaust. The detonation lit up the night as it was destroyed. In the grim aftermath, Colonel Good, prioritizing the survival of his men over a futile escape, made a poignant decision. He led approximately 400 prisoners of war back to captivity. As they marched disconsolately back, a German soldier offered a sympathetic remark. Perhaps he recognized their shared exhaustion. "Get some sleep, fellows. You've had a tough night." General von Goeckel, with a somber nod, observed, "Fortunes change." Approximately 150 prisoners of war, however, chose to slip away and attempt escape on their own. The American belief in encountering formidable German Tiger tanks on the Rusenberg persisted for years. This legend was later debunked. Historical accounts suggest the ambush was carried out by nimble Hetzer tank destroyers and camouflaged buses. Task Force Baum became a stark, bloody example of the dangers of poorly planned military actions. It was born from General Patton's personal urgency to rescue his son-in-law. It exposed the fierce resilience of late-war German forces. It shattered any myth of a swift, easy rescue. It was a mission that, despite its heroic intent, ended in devastating American casualties. It was a profound realization of the brutal, unpredictable choices of warfare. The final act of liberation for the men of Oflag 13B Hammelburg unfolded not with the thunderous charge of Task Force Baum. It came with the measured advance of the 14th Armored Division. On April 5th, as American tanks crunched over the wire, the German guards lowered the swastika. Their war-weary faces were devoid of defiance. They raised a white flag. For the remaining prisoners, including the Schubenites, who had endured the brutal march from Poland, it was a moment of profound, almost disorienting relief. Major Charles Odom, General Patton's personal physician, arrived with a singular, urgent question: "Where's Colonel Waters?" He led a special medical team to evacuate Johnny Waters, still gravely wounded. Waters, seeing his old friend, managed a wry, "Funny meeting you here, Charles." But the joy was not universal. Private Robert Zawada, witnessing the preferential treatment, harbored a bitter question: what the brass had against men with one leg. Why leave him behind and take Johnny Waters? General Patton, himself driven by a complex mix of duty and personal concern, visited both Waters and Boehm. He presented Distinguished Service Crosses to Boehm for his earlier actions in North Africa. Yet, even in this moment of recognition, a lingering doubt about the true purpose of Task Force Boehm persisted. Patton's dismissive remark to a lieutenant offered a convenient narrative. It was a feint to the east, son, while the main force was turning to the north and then east for the next push. But it left Boehm, who later entered the clothing business, forever deprived of an admissions about the mission's real intent. The immediate aftermath of Task Force Boehm was a tactical failure for the United States. The Rosenberg still bore the scars of the ambush. The remains of American tanks and self-propelled guns were left to rust for decades. They were grim monuments to the bloody encounter. At least 9 Americans were killed, 16 missing, and 32 wounded. Hundreds were captured. Hauptmann Eggermann, the fanatical officer whose determination had led the successful German defense, was promoted to major. He was recommended for the Oak Leaves, to his Knight's Cross. But even German victory came with a cost. Oberst Hoppe, despite praising Eggermann in his report, succumbed to the reputational damage. He committed suicide on April 23rd. For the Schubenites and other liberated prisoners of war, the journey home was far from a simple return. Colonel Good, who had led a group of prisoners of war back to Hammelburg after the chaotic raid, demonstrated his enduring leadership. He organized boxcar travel for many. These boxcars, designed for 8 horses or 40 men, were marked with POW and a white United States star. But the stink of horse manure permeated the 3-day journey. Good, exhausted but resolute, carried his bagpipes. They secretly contained his illicit radio receiver. He carried them all the way to Moosburg, where he surprised United States Army Air Force's Colonel Bub Clark. For those liberated by the Red Army in the East, the choice was often NASCO or bust. It was a chaotic scramble for transport that could lead to dangerous encounters. He noted the unblinking female Russian attendants in the men's shower room. The psychological impact of captivity was a silent, insidious enemy that many fought long after the war. Brooks Kleber, sailing home on the troopship Mariposa, found himself constantly watching for torpedo tracks. It was a phantom threat that underscored his lingering anxiety. His return home, crossing the street to his uncle's house, became my last psychological obstacle. I had made it home. He described leading the life of a tethered dog and his starvation diet. These were symptoms of the profound trauma. Thornton Sigler simply wrote "freedom" in his diary. It was a single word encapsulating years of longing. But for others, the scars ran deeper. Spud Murphy, a resourceful escaper, tragically committed suicide. He was unable to reconcile with the horrors he had endured. Alfred Nelson only opened up about his escape in his 80s. The memories were too raw for decades. Captain William D. Robbins, attempting to inform a colonel of his son's death, was rejected. The colonel perceived capture itself as a disgrace. Beyond the personal trauma, suppressed truths slowly began to surface. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Van Vliet, a prisoner of war from Oflag 64, had provided photographs and a report on the Katyn massacre in 1943. It exposed the Soviets as perpetrators, but in the desperate calculus of wartime alliances, the United States government ordered his silence. It sought to avoid alienating a crucial Soviet ally. It aligned with the Soviet narrative. The truth, however, could not be buried forever. Decades later, after Poland regained democratic government in the 1990s, the full horror of Katyn was finally acknowledged. It was a testament to the eventual triumph of historical truth over political expediency. The legacy of the Schubenites and the Big Break remains profound. With over 250 prisoners of war, specifically 241 American officers and enlisted men successfully escaping the marching column, it is recognized as the most successful mass escape of World War II. It left the Great Escape well in the shade. Their resourcefulness, ingenuity, and stubbornness, pluck and grit, challenged the prevailing idea that all escapes were immediately detected. It challenged the idea that the Great Escape was the sole pinnacle of prisoner of war ingenuity. These American prisoners, going under, over, or through the wire, demonstrated a unique brand of organized resistance. In the post-war years, the former Krieges embarked on new lives. Boomer Holder, known for his cheerful opening, "It's a lovely day to be in Athens," owned 2 radio stations. Bill Ash, the compulsive escapeur, became a successful author. He contrasted his bread and water diet, in the cooler, with book launch celebrations. Jack Hemingway, freed from Moosebird, lost 70 pounds. He celebrated victory in Europe Day in Paris. He became an Idaho conservationist. The town of Subin itself, where the living hell of Oflag 64 once stood, saw its former campsite transformed. It became a school for at-risk youth. It was a poignant symbol of renewal. Alphonse Jakalski, who had processed mugshots for escapees, later became principal of that very school. Mays Anderson initially feared a 1985 visit to Zubin, but he found that seeing the quiet little town and the former camp helped to lay ghosts to rest. It was now without barbed wire and with children playing. It made the entire concept of war seem ridiculous. The Shubinites and their fellow Krieges, through their resilience and unyielding pursuit of freedom, had not only survived a brutal war, they had also etched an indelible mark on history. They forever challenged the perception of captivity and proved the indomitable spirit of those who dared to defy.